everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast with the company's expert. And on this episode, we're going to be examining education versus experience. Which one will get you hired? And in particular, why certain recruiters and hiring managers place more importance on education, whereas others place more importance and more weight on experience. We're going to cover that. And today also we're going to take a question from a viewer. There was a viewer who sent in a big long question asking about presentations in job interviews. If you go to a job interview and they ask you to have prepared a presentation beforehand that you will give during your job interview, there are some concerns with that and people have a lot of questions. So we're going to get into that also. But first, I want to thank everyone for listening. You guys are awesome. Don't forget to subscribe to both of my YouTube channels, The Company's Expert and The Company's Expert 2. This podcast is usually at home on Company's Expert 2, but occasionally I'll be posting some of these on my main channel also. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first topic for today is education versus experience. As a lot of you guys know, when you apply for a job and when they evaluate you as to your suitability, qualification, and fit for the job, they look for education and they look for experience, sometimes in different proportions. And depending on what you're applying for and who you're dealing with, they may judge you more on one than the other. So let's talk about that. Now, if you were to look up this topic in books, in articles, and on the internet, usually the answer you get is that is in the form of statistics, where they quote statistics and they say, well, the higher the education you have, the more chances you have of securing employment, and the higher your chances of securing reliable, steady employment, and so on. And they give you a bunch of percentages. But as a lot of us know, especially students coming out of school that are applying for their first career job, it seems like a catch-22, because even though you have a comparatively high level of education, perhaps for your age or your stage of your career, it seems like the sticking point is experience. You don't have a lot of job experience, and for that reason, you don't seem to be qualified for a lot of jobs. Now, this is a concern for a lot of people, and people wonder about this question. Now, it's interesting because if you go back several decades to after World War II, and you look at the employment situation, the peak period, I imagine, was the 1950s. And people were less selective back then when you applied for a job. They would ask, what's your education? They would ask for proof of your education. They'd ask you a few questions. And then, beyond that, if they had a lot, assuming there wasn't any red flags with interacting with you, there was no issue with your personality or your communication or anything like that, any obvious red flags, you'd be qualified for the job, and it was first come, first serve. And unless they were looking for anything special, that was kind of the extent to which they screened a lot of people for jobs across the board in general. Now, several decades later, a couple of things have happened. First of all, the education landscape has changed quite a bit, and education, or higher education, is available to a higher percentage of the population. And I'm keeping in mind that people listening are from different countries, so depending on your country and your region, this is kind of the general trend. And a couple of things have happened also. Education has also been used as a tool to push the workforce out for several years so that they are delayed from entering the job market. Okay, think about it. If people graduate from high school at age 18 or thereabouts, and, there might not be enough jobs for them to be fully employed, a way to handle this is to get those people then to spend another 4 to 6 years in post-secondary education, because that delays them by 4 and 6 years from actually joining the workforce. And this has been a phenomenon we've seen. And coupled with that, when you do get out into the workforce, the screening methods are a little more in depth and involved these days. It's no longer simply a matter of can you do the job. There's a lot more screening that goes into somebody first, and there's a lot more mistrust. Companies are wanting to reduce their risk, as it were, by trying to get more guarantees that this candidate will work out. And there's several reasons for that. One of them is that it is more costly to companies now to onboard employees. There's more things they have to do by law. There's more training they have to give by law. And so it's more of an investment. So you want to make sure you get the right employee. Now, one of the things that I have noticed in my career, and many other people have commented on, is that depending on who is screening you, if you are a candidate, depending on who is screening you, their opinion as to which one is more important, education or experience, tends to depend on the culture of the organization. And there doesn't seem to be too much rhyme or reason. Some organizations are big believers in education, and they hire based on that. Other organizations are big believers in experience, and they place much more importance on that. And sometimes this attitude is dependent on the culture of an entire industry, or sometimes it's just the culture of that particular organization where they hold those beliefs and those values. It also boils down to some of the individuals involved. If you have a hiring manager that's recruiting you and they're interviewing you for a job and they are assessing your suitability for the job, and that hiring manager tends to not have a lot of education, they will tend to hire in their image. They will tend to place value on the candidates that also don't have a lot of education, but have a lot of experience, perhaps like they do. Whereas if you are going through a series of job interviews, and the person evaluating you, the hiring manager evaluating you, conversely has a lot of education and perhaps less on-the-job experience, they will tend to hire in their image, and they will tend to place more importance on education and therefore place more value on the candidates that have more education as opposed to more experience. So this is a well-known phenomenon. People hire in their own image. People place value on others that have attributes like they do. So this is something that's well known. Now, this can partially explain for the seeming lack of logic or inconsistency when it comes to this problem. And this is a big problem, as I said, for a lot of students that are joining the workforce, that are coming out of school, having received education credentials. And they're finding that, well, education isn't the only thing you need. You also need a lot of experience. And they find that they are confronted with a catch-22 because they will not get hired without having experience, and they can't get experience without getting hired. And this is a vicious cycle. And I've received a lot of questions about that. Now, let's talk about that, because that's, like I said, that's actually quite interesting. And I know a lot of people are struggling with this problem right now. If they're looking for a way out of this catch-22. Now, a common answer to that, that I've heard other people say, is things like internships, things like where work experience is arranged through your educational institution. You know, things like volunteering can also help too. Okay. But I would like to point out a pretty obvious, at least obvious to me, way to break this cycle. And that is to not get your job by applying to by answering job ads with a job application. Instead, you get your job through networking. This is like a common thing I say, because if you look it up, do your own research, you don't have to take my word for it. You will find, if you look this up, that most people that get jobs get it through networking. It's far more common to people who have been hired through networking than to have been hired by responding to a job ad cold, where they don't have any prior relationships with anyone in the organization. Okay? This comes as a surprise to a lot of people, especially a lot of young people. People always assume the default way to get a job is to look for job postings, respond to the job postings with a job application, usually with the resume or possibly other forms, and get called in for an interview. That's actually not the most popular way of getting a job. A lot of people find that surprising. You actually get a job through networking. Now, the problem is that a lot of people don't know what networking actually means. Like, what does that word actually mean? Well, a lot of us, we have this impression of going to an event, like a social function, and rubbing shoulders with strangers and engaging in chit-chat, and then sort of passing business cards and somehow connecting with a hiring manager, somebody who is looking to hire an employee and has the authority to hire an employee and is wanting to do it. That's not really what that means. It can take that form, but often it doesn't. The form that most closely resembles that is going to a job fair. Now, for students coming out of school, you can do it that way. Okay, if you have job fairs at your college or school or university, you can go to that. You can have a bunch of business cards in your pocket. You can hand out resumes. You can do that. But for most people, that's not the form it takes. The other thing that comes to mind when you say networking is having a friend of a friend that knows somebody who is friends with someone's brother who is married to the hiring manager at an organization, and saying, can you put in a good word for me? Now, that does happen, okay? And I don't have precise data on how much of networking involves that vector, that way of getting a job, but that does happen. But that's not the method I'm talking about. The method I'm talking about when I say get a job through networking, and I'm not the only one advocating this, is something completely different. This is where you contact the company yourself. Now, in the days before social networking, this was a little more nerve-wracking because you actually had to pick up a phone or you had to go down physically to the company and go walk into the building and talk to the receptionist and say, hi, my name is this, and I'm wondering if I could speak to the hiring manager or the manager that's in charge of this particular department. Would they be available? Usually the answer was no. So you'd say, okay, no problem. Thank you very much. If it's okay, I would like to leave this for them. And you hand them your resume and maybe a business card and say, could you pass that on to them? And I will follow up. Thank you very much. And then you would follow up with a phone call, maybe the next day, saying, hello, my name is, X, and I just wanted to make sure that you received my resume that I dropped off yesterday. I didn't get the opportunity to speak with you, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm an expert in this. I'm very enthusiastic about doing this type of work. And if you're ever looking for someone that can do that, please give me a call. I'd love to work at your company. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Something like that. That's how you would do this in the old days. However, today it is ridiculously easy to do this. You don't have to talk to anyone in person. You don't have to get on the phone with anyone. You can do it all through social networking. And the primary vehicle for this will be LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is, after all, the Facebook of business. And it is an incredible tool. Not only can you look at companies themselves and organizations, but you can look at the individuals within the organizations. You can see their resume. You can see their job title. You can even see their picture. And you have the ability to send them a direct message. And this is the vehicle you use to get a job through networking. What you do is, on your own initiative, you find a company that you would like to work for. This would be a company that's in your location, say your hometown, possibly nearby. And you know what they do. They're in your industry. And you have an idea of the type of work they do. They do the type of work that you are qualified for doing and you are enthusiastic about doing. Now, you can find this through Google, and I've talked about this extensively. Okay, one really great trick is to go to Google and in the search box, type the name of your hometown, your city, where you are. If you're in a city, great. If you're not, just your town or whatever, wherever you are. In my case, I'm talking to you from Winnipeg, Canada. And so I'd go to Google and I type Winnipeg, world's greatest city, into the search box. And then when the results come up, I hit the word maps. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at a map of Winnipeg, a map of my hometown. And then at the top of the screen, there's a search box. Under Google Maps, there's a search box. So now that we're looking at a picture of your hometown, a map of it, you type in the name of your industry. So let's pretend you got a degree in engineering. Okay, I don't know, mechanical engineering, something like that. You would type in mechanical engineering. And what you'll see is on the map, the businesses that have something to do with mechanical engineering will start popping up on the map. You'll be able to see their physical location, how close it is to you. And then you have all their information. You have their name, their address. You even have a phone number if you want to use that, but you have their email address. Now, this gives you a list of the organizations that are near you, that are in the industry, that do the work that you're qualified for and you're interested in. So this is a great first step. You can, by typing various searches into that search box, you can find many organizations, usually many companies, many branch offices, and make a list of potential employers. So you have a list of potential employers that are near you, that are in your industry, that could be looking for people. Now, most jobs are not posted publicly. Most jobs exist on what they call the hidden job market. That means somebody's looking for a job, but they haven't quite got to the point yet where they're going to post it publicly. Usually they might know a friend or of a friend, or someone that, they might know, a business contact that would be suitable for that job. So if you have a candidate that would be perfect for it that you know of, why post the job publicly until you check to make sure that that person is not the perfect fit? Okay, so a lot of times these companies are looking to hire even when they don't have job postings posted publicly. So you got a list of companies. You know that a lot of companies are hiring, even if they don't have job postings. Now, with a tool like LinkedIn, you can go onto LinkedIn and you can start entering the names of these companies or these organizations that you found that are in your industry, that are near your location. And with LinkedIn, you can look inside those companies to the individuals. You can see the different managers that have potential to be hiring managers. That means they have potential to be people who are looking to hire and have the authority to hire and want to hire someone, right? You can see their name, their title, and you can contact them directly. You can send them a direct message. Now, I'm skipping over a few details of LinkedIn. I mean, you can jump to this. Sometimes it requires you to build up a little bit of a network first and jump through a couple of hoops. But basically, you could do this. And a lot of people do, including myself. So what you do then is you go to the list of companies, you look at the individuals in those companies, you look at what their position is, and then you start firing out a template message that basically says something to the effect of, hello, my name is this. I'm great at this. I'd love to work at your company. I can solve this particular problem. If ever you're looking for someone that can do that type of work, please give me a call because I'm excited to investigate any job possibility at your company. Thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day. Now, this is a numbers game. So if you send this out to 100 people, you're not going to get responses from most of them because most of them, just playing the odds, won't be looking for someone with your skills right at this precise time. But if you send it out to 100 people, a certain percentage will be interested. Depending on your industry and, the details of your situation and what you're looking for, that number is going to vary. But my results, in my experience, is with the way I would do this. I would send out a connection request, like, be my friend, be my connection. And I would only go to CEOs. That was just my thing. I'd go to CEOs only. So I'm not interested in talking about, talking to middle managers somewhere deep down in the company. I'm interested in talking to the owner or the most senior manager, essentially the CEO of companies of various sizes. And for CEOs, when I did this, I would have a 30% response rate for a connection request. So that means if I sent out 100 of these, I would get 30 responses. And then of those 30 responses, I would request an interview. I would say, hello, I have this, I'm looking for this. I'd very much like to speak with you. Can we get together? Words to that effect. And I would have a 20% response rate for those. So out of 30 people, 20% of 30 is, I'm terrible at math. I have an engineering degree. I think I'd be better at math. But I don't know, a handful of people. I'd have a handful of interviews lined up. And I'd go. And a lot of those would turn into contract work, job opportunities, things like that. I was, in my case, I've been using this technique for consulting and contract work. All the consulting and contract work I've gotten in the last 6-7 years, something like that, has been exclusively using this method. And this method works if you just want to get a job. So I'm throwing this out there as an example, okay? Now, depending on who you talk to, they have different precise recommendations of how you contact companies and what precisely you say, but that's basically the process. That's a process. You contact the company and you basically make your pitch. Your pitch is, hello, this is what I do. This is the problem I solve. If ever you're looking for someone who can do that type of work, please let me know because I know a bit about your company and I'd be excited to work for you. That's all. Thank you very much. Have yourselves a great day. That's all it takes. Now, if there just happens to be a hiring manager out there who's looking for someone with your skills right at this time, let's say they haven't gotten around to posting a job yet. They'll go to you first. They'll say, hey, I could save myself a lot of trouble and a lot of money. Instead of posting this job, I'll just meet with this person. I'll tell them about possibly an opportunity we have, see what they have to say. And if it works out, they seem like they have potential, then we'll look a bit further, but then that would be perfect. I don't have to post this job. Now, what you're doing by doing this kind of process is you're demonstrating your traits. You're demonstrating your initiative. You're demonstrating your communication skills. You're demonstrating your professionalism. You're demonstrating your charisma. You're demonstrating many things, many abilities by doing this process. And that can substitute for job experience. The reason they want job experience in the first place is to reassure them that you can do the job. But when you do something like this, you contact an organization, you contact a hiring manager, you have a meeting with the hiring manager, you present yourself professionally, you answer any questions they have about yourself, you ask about the company, about their industry, this sort of thing. You're demonstrating firsthand what you have. Job experience in that situation is not necessary because they like you. They know that you know your stuff and they're impressed by your initiative. And that is signaled by the fact that they're meeting with you and talking to you. If you were a turnoff the way you approach them, they wouldn't pursue anything with you. But if they respond and say, yeah, we should get together, we might be able to, there might be something here. We might have a job for you. That's the way to do it. So that's a solution to the catch-22 of having education, but then finding that no one will hire you because they also require experience, and then not being able to get experience because no one will hire you, and that catch-22. That's what can break the cycle. And it breaks the cycle because you're not talking about how good you are. You're demonstrating it in the way you contact them and the way you communicate with them. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, I go into much greater detail on precisely how to do this in a course I have. I do have a lot of free YouTube videos on my YouTube channel where I talk about parts of this process and I give scripts and things like that. So if that interests you, you can check out more there. But that's the bottom line for this kind of thing. As most people know, depending on the job you're looking for, I would say education is probably, if I had to pick one over the other, I'd pick education. However, it's not the be-all, end-all by far. Experience does matter, and experience does demonstrate that A, you can do the job, B, you enjoy the job because you persist with it, and you last in the job. You've done the job for a while and you haven't been fired. That tends to suggest that you're capable of doing it and you're not a problem employee. So both have their place, but if I had to pick one over the other, I'd pick education. A lot of people with education, that most jobs you can do. If you're qualified for a job, you could do the job. There might be a small learning curve where you learn the minutia of how to operate in that role, in that organization, but it's really not something that's going to be a major problem. Everyone undergoes a learning curve, and, it's not something that's a real concern. The only concern is on the part of the recruiters who don't know if you're psychologically suited to the work, and they don't know you. So the only way they can make a judgment about you is by looking at your work history. And when there's a lack of work history, that's what scares them. However, by short-circuiting the system, as it were, and getting a job through networking where you demonstrate your attributes and your traits and your professionalism, that eliminates the need to show experience to validate you. So hopefully that makes sense. So this is an interesting topic. I've never really talked about this topic much on my YouTube channels, but this is my sort of first attempt. So hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions about this, please send them in. Please comment on the video. And as always, if I can answer in like a sentence or two, I will. But if it requires more of an explanation, I may save your question for the podcast. And speaking of that, we have a very long question that somebody sent in. This is a question. This was sent in by Miss Ward Daly. And Miss Ward Daly has sent in an incredibly long comment here on the YouTube video. I don't know if I'll be able to actually go through this entire thing because it's multiple paragraphs, but it starts off pretty simple enough. It says, "Hey, Bill, could you please make a video about your thoughts on these notions? Number one, companies wanting candidates to prepare presentations as perhaps a last stage or stage of interview, even though there's no guarantee that you will get the job." Well, before we go any further, let me talk about that. Yes, this is quite a common thing, actually. I've been to, like earlier in my career, I've been to many job interviews where they required that, or they requested that you present. You give like a 3-minute presentation or a 10-minute presentation on a certain topic, and they evaluated you partly based on your presentation. Now, yes, Miss Ward Daly, you are absolutely correct. There's no guarantee that you can get the job, and so this is a higher stakes thing. You've got to put more effort and time in preparing for this presentation, knowing full well that you may not get the job and all that preparation, in a sense, is wasted, right? Well, a couple of things right off the hop. First of all, the fact that you are asking me about this and I'm making an assumption here, but I'm reading into this that presentations are perhaps not your strong suit, and you are concerned about doing it. And to prepare for one, you would have to put in a lot of work because perhaps you're nervous about it, or you don't have a lot of experience doing presentations. So this, for you, this would be a big concern. And that's an assumption I'm making. I could be wrong, but just the circumstances here. Now, here's what I would say. Okay, let's pretend that you prepare a presentation, you give a presentation. It's a big deal. It's like a 10-minute presentation. You have to put a lot of time and effort into it, and you don't get the job. Well, I would argue that your effort has not been wasted, because the way you learn public speaking and the way you learn presenting is by doing it. And practice makes perfect. And the more practice you have, the better you get. So I know this sounds kind of cliched, but I would look at it as an opportunity. Okay? Let's say you do this and you don't get the job. Not fun, but not all is lost. You get that much more experienced. You get that much better at this. And when you have to give presentations for a future job, you will be that much better at it. In addition, if you are ambitious and you want to move up the so-called corporate ladder, you want to be a manager, you want to manage people, well, a component of that is public speaking and presenting. You have to get up in front of a group and give a speech. You have to get up and give a talk. Sometimes it will be extemporaneous. It'll just be on the off the cuff where you haven't prepared anything. Sometimes it could be very formal. You have to give a report. You have to give a presentation. And as I said, you learn this stuff by doing it. And in the beginning, everybody is nervous. Trust me on this one. Okay? Nobody is instantly good at this stuff. It comes by practice. It comes by getting nervous as hell and having butterflies in your stomach. But you know what? For a lot of people, if you put in the preparation and you learn it, you get up there, and when the moment arrives, you actually surprise yourself at how good you are. Everybody tends to think of, these situations with dread. They think like, oh God, it's a job interview. I'm going to do terrible. I'm going to bomb. So when you go up there and you don't bomb and you feel like, you know what, that wasn't so bad. I remembered my lines. I remembered my presentation and, I got through it, right? You get that much more confidence when you do. So think of it. I know this doesn't help because you still have to do the work, but think of it as an investment in yourself. Okay. Now I'm speaking from experience. I mean, I would have never been able to get up in front of a group of people, sometimes a rather intimidating looking group, and talk and give instructions and report on what's going on and be able to take questions, sometimes even hostile questions. I would have never been able to do that had I not had years of practice, and I have had to give presentations for job interviews. And in fact, I don't know if this helps you, but some of the presentations I gave in interviews, I liked giving the presentation because it was a nice change from talking about what you have and having them not believe you, perhaps. Instead, you're demonstrating what you have. And in my case, I found that was much more convincing. I'm an individual who has changed careers several times. And so when you talk about work experience that they're not familiar with, they tend to forget what you said. It doesn't resonate with them. But when you get up and you present and you demonstrate that you know what you're talking about and you appear like you know your stuff, that can fix that situation. So think of it that way. Okay. Now, Miss Ward Daly goes on in her question. So that was kind of her number one that she'd like me to respond to. Number two, why a hiring manager selects and moves you to the next stage interview only to then be scheduled on a peer interview that ends the process. Now, there's a big, long explanation after this. I'm not sure I'll be able to really get through here, but yeah, I mean, listen, there are a lot of hiring managers out there. There's a lot of recruiters out there, some more professional than others. And the attitude I think everyone needs to have when you go into these type of situations, you really have to take a leaf out of the playbook for salespeople, because essentially you're selling yourself. You're acting like an outside salesperson selling yourself. You're having to talk about your benefits and, see if they'll go along with your pitch, which is that you're the best employee. And then you make a case for yourself, and in that situation, everything that you put into that particular hiring manager or that recruiter or that job, you risk it all being for nothing. That's just the name of the game. Okay. If you want to apply for something, you're taking the risk that your time is going to be wasted, because if you're not selected, then all the work you've done, all the effort you've put into it, it doesn't pay off, or at least not directly. You could use the argument that it pays off in the sense that you're getting practice and you're getting experience at doing it, and you get a little bit better over time, right? But you got to be prepared for your time to be wasted. You've got to risk that one transaction. That's the price you pay for putting yourself forward as a serious contender for jobs. Now, listen, companies, they can do what they want in the sense they can treat you with respect, or they may not. There's many horror stories of bad recruiters that have terrible communication skills, that string people along for no reason. It's a very dishonest process. It can be a very negative experience. It can be a very demoralizing experience. And if that's what you're experiencing, you are not alone. Okay, I assure you, and I sympathize, because there are some really unprofessional, bad recruiters and hiring managers out there that are treating candidates extremely unprofessionally and extremely poorly. In fact, a lot less professionally and a lot worse than they need to. Sometimes it's because they're just bad at what they do. Other times they've got a chip on their shoulder. And it's a bit of a power syndrome, where the power of being able to decide people's future goes to their head, and they like to project it. It's an abuse of power. So if that's what you're encountering, you have my deepest sympathy. I know it can be very stressful. It can be very demoralizing. Unfortunately, you have to go through the bad experiences to get to the good experience. So this is no exception. If they're asking you to do presentations and it's very demoralizing because you prepare for presentations and then you have a bad outcome, you don't get selected, and even they even can add insult to injury at the end by not selecting you and doing it in a very unprofessional way. Their communication is terrible, and they don't even extend basic courtesies to make the whole process more palatable and more positive for the candidates. If that's what you're experiencing, that's terrible, and it's a shame. But unfortunately, it's rather common these days. You just have to get through it. Look at it as an opportunity for you to work on your presenting skills. Listen, let's pretend that you were unemployed for, say, 6 months. You were 6 months between jobs. It took you 6 months to find your next job. Now, during that time, let's say you went to several of these type of interviews where you had to prepare a presentation. You could look at it as that 6 months wasn't a complete waste. You didn't just stagnate for 6 months. You actually improved your presentation skills. You were working on it by preparing for a presentation and then giving it, preparing for another presentation and then giving it, all under nerve-wracking circumstances, all under stress, job stress. Okay. But you pull it off. Those skills will last with you pretty much for the long haul, to the end of your career. And if ever you have to give a presentation in your job, or you have to do a sort of high profile presentation, I've given keynotes, so I know what it's like to give like a big talk to a big room. Usually you work up to that. And then by the time you do it, it becomes like, okay, I just got to do a regular presentation, but just on a slightly bigger scale, bigger visual aids, more technology, more sound reinforcement, and more lights and things. But basically the same thing I usually do. We'll just up the, up the dynamism, put on a slightly more of a show. It's not wasted. That's all I'll say. So hopefully that makes sense. I want to thank Miss Ward Daly for sending this in. I did read this whole thing earlier. It feels a bit strange trying to read it all on the podcast because it would take quite a bit long for me to read it out loud. But thank you very much. Hopefully that answers your questions. If anybody has any questions about any of this, please leave them in the comments. Like I said, if it's a quick answer, I'll usually type that in. If not, and it's a really good question, I will hold that to explain on the podcast. So thank you very much. I want to remind everyone that if you would like more information about how to get a job through networking, I have several videos on my YouTube channel. And I also have a course called Get Hired. There's a link in the description for this video to that course. If you want the full Monty, the full shebang-a-bang on how to get a job, if you're changing careers, if you're facing a catch-22 between education and experience, and you are having issues finding a job, and then putting yourself forward for the job and getting selected for the job, consider taking my course. Check it out. I've done videos that explain what's in the course, and that might be of some help for you. I'm currently almost finished creating my second course, which is called the $100 MBA. This is for people who, for multiple people who are interested in learning the content that you would take in a Master's of Business Administration, an MBA, but you don't really want to spend 2 years of your life and spend, 5 figures on getting the degree, but you just want the benefit from the degree. You don't necessarily need the accreditation and the piece of paper, but you want to know the content. Consider checking out my $100 MBA course. It provides incredible value for money. I walk you through an entire MBA. I recommend textbooks that are used in universities across the world that teach MBAs, that are used in Harvard and other, institutions. You can order them from Amazon or a dealer of your choice online for cheap. You can get slightly older editions, and they're very cheap. And you can study them at your convenience and go in depth to a level that suits you. And I walk you through it. I am your guide through the entire process. So if you're thinking of taking an MBA and just want to kind of put your toe in the water first and see if it's right for you, consider checking out my course. If you are an entrepreneur or somebody who wants to get into business and start your own company, this is something that would be very useful for you. You get the benefit from it with a fraction of the cost. And if you are thinking of taking an MBA, but just want to get a bit of a head start so that you do better when you actually take your MBA, this would also be something for you. So check that out if you're interested. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my 2 channels, The Company's Expert and The Company's Expert 2. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much for your attention. Take care, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you very much.